When Aragorn died, could Arwen have gone west? Now, her twisted family roots say both yes and no. But today I'm going to kind of evaluate at what point was the way barred for her to go west, and at what point did she decide that she was going to be choosing the mortal life. So hopefully that interests you. Stick around for that. Hello, this is Gone with Gandalf, and today we're in slightly different surroundings, but if you do enjoy these lore videos just as much as I enjoy making them, then please do remember to like and subscribe. Anyway, yeah, let's get on with the video now then, okay? Sorry for the spoiler in the first bit of my intro, but if you've still not seen Return of the King, then that's kind of on you. Or read it, obviously. Arwen was an elf from the point of her birth in 241 of the Third Age, and she was the daughter of Elrond and Celebrindal, and therefore her grandmother was also Galadriel, so that's quite nice. But this really goes even deeper into family history, just as everything else does in Middle-earth concerning, you know, the Dunedain and the Elves. See, she is of Half Elven descent, but you can't live just, 3,000 years without being an elf. There is no man alive that has lived that long. By the way, bonus points if you know who the eldest man alive in Middle-earth is. But for those of you that aren't aware of the Half-Elven line, it's a key theme of the Silmarillion. So if we just go a little bit back, I'll go over it very briefly. So you've got Elrond, and his father then was Eärendil, the mariner, and he's quite famous, he's spoken about quite a lot. He was also a half-elf, and then his father was also a man, so Tuor, and so there's a lot of man blood in that. And then on the other side as well, the wife of Eärendil was Elwing, and then her grandfather was Beren, and he was of course of Beren and Lúthien fame. However, perhaps the most important figure in the Half-Elven line is Eärendil the Mariner. He is so called because he was quite fond of ships, and he is also very famous for being the first and only guy to really sail from Middle-earth in the First Age over to Aman. Many had tried, but he was the first one to succeed. But he made it onto dry land over there, and he pleaded for mercy from the Valar to come and help the two kindreds, elves and men, in their titanic tussle with Morgoth in the First Age. But because he had come into the Undying Lands, he was no longer permitted to go into the Outer Lands, and for that reason he was given the choice to whether he was to be a man or an elf, and then also remain in Aman. Now then, this choice of to be a man or an elf, this was given to Eärendil's descendants, or rather just to Elrond and Elros, the twins of Eärendil. However, there's definitely some time before you make this choice whether or not to be an elf or a man. Eärendil, for instance, he was about 39. Elrond and Elros, they were about 58 when they had to make their choice, although that's nothing in comparison to Arwen, because at the time of the Return of the King, she is almost 3,000 years old. So what gives here? At what point did she become an elf? And, when could she no longer just sail into the west? So let's look at how she could defer her choice, because that is, of course, what she did do. She could have sailed west before she met Aragorn quite happily, but she actually intervened and allowed Frodo to take her place and sail west. But that still doesn't quite answer the question, does it? So initially I thought that the choice was probably made when Aragorn and Arwen were married, but I don't think that's strictly true. If we just look back at some of their ancestors, we look at Beren and Lúthien, for example, they weren't actually married at the point when they died and then they were brought back to life, but they weren't married at that point. They promised themselves to one another. And Aragorn and Arwen had both done the same on the hill of Cerin Amroth in Lothlorien, where they had basically said, yeah, we're gonna marry at some point. But then what about Tuor and Idril Celebrindal? Well, I'll get to that also a little bit later, because there's something interesting we can talk about that too in this context. But say the choice was not yet made even at Cerin Amroth. Maybe at that point she could still have sailed west if she wanted to at any point at that time. But what about if that choice was then taken away, or made rather, when she had the child with Aragorn? So let's bring in another ancestor. Come on in, Melian the Maia. She's very high up in the family tree, right at the beginning. Perhaps I'll have another graphic here. Did that work? So being a Maia, she is of course tied to the fate of Eärendil, just the same as elves are, but she also has like raiment, and she'd chosen to be seen as an elf. And during the time that she was married to an elf, Elu Thingol, Elwë Thingol, he's got loads of names. But anyway, for the time that she was married to him, she was bound to being an elf, particularly once she had a child and brought some life into the world, and that was Lúthien. So at that point, she had to be an elf. But once Thingol was killed, she was then able to escape her elven form and go west in her whatever raiment she chose to be in. Now, of course, this is a little bit different to the Aragorn and Arwen situation, because Aragorn is still a man, and Thingol, once he is killed as an elf, he can be rehoused in a new body after spending some time in purgatory of the Halls of Mandos out in Aman, whereas Aragorn cannot. So it's not quite the best example, but it is interesting to look at these past examples that have happened within her family tree of how these have worked out. Anyway, we'll move on. Right, what was next? So then, Aragorn did actually then die on the 120th year of the Fourth Age, but Arwen, she'd outlive him by an extra year. And kind of occurs to me, because Beren and Lúthien, they kind of went out together, they both chose to die and give up their life. So did Aragorn, so his son could then rule, Eldarion. But I question why Arwen then took a whole year to then choose to die. And when I say choose to die, they're not committing suicide. They let go of their will to live, and they just kind of stop living. It's something that the Númenórean kings often did, so that they could then pass on the kingship to their sons or daughters when they were in the fullness of their strength, wisdom and might. And this is what Aragorn did. But why did Arwen take a whole year? Did she make the choice only during this period of time? Because that's a long time to, think about things. Like, if she was so committed to living her life with Aragorn, why did she continue going on when, he was no longer around? So what did she do then? Well, she went back to Cerin Amroth in the now deserted Lothlórien, and because all the elves had cleared off, and she went back to the mound that they had both promised each other to marry one another, and there it is said that is where she gave up her life. Now, normally you would think that would be the end, but what if, and this is just, for the sake of conversation about this topic, what if she only died in spirit? What if, in body, and then her spirit did go to the Halls of Mandos? Because we, of course, have no idea, or rather the elves have no idea, where the spirits of men go after they die. So perhaps, rather than spending eternity who knows where, perhaps she was allowed to go back to the Halls of Mandos and then be rehoused in a new body. I don't know. I don't personally think that is what happened. I personally think that she did just die, and that was it. She just gave up her life. She just spent the whole year going on a little pilgrimage back to where it all began, and seeing where she used to live back in Lothlórien with her grandmother way back when. However, these exceptions can sometimes happen, because as I earlier mentioned, Tuor, he was a man, and he would then marry Idril Celebrindal, and they would have a child, and that would be Eärendil, and so on and so forth. He would have the line of the Half Elves. But he was the first and the only man to be counted within the ranks of the firstborn. So he actually became an elf, and he also sailed west. And that obviously could be one of these things that Tolkien just kind of thought about, like that would be interesting, and then they just left it in, because of course much of the Silmarillion, it was unfinished and they are just like notes. So it's entirely possible, if Tolkien had had more time then, and to kind of collate all these thoughts into one cohesive book a bit better and finish his work, then he might have gone back and changed that part of the story. But you know, perhaps Arwen could have gone west. I don't know. Because then, of course, we look at her twins, Elladan and Elrohir. They, as far as we know, they're still around, knocking around well into the Fourth Age, because they actually still are in Rivendell. They spend some time with Celeborn, their grandfather, and after he sails west, we don't know what they're doing, and they certainly still have not picked whether or not to be elves or men. So yeah, I mean, that's another thing up for debate. Perhaps Amazon will do a series on them. Who knows? It'll be quite an interesting one, actually. So then, that is the end of today's topic and today's video. So thank you very much for watching, if you have enjoyed it, and if you haven't, then thanks for still watching even this far. But always in these lore videos, it's fantastic just to see the differing points of view. So let me know in the comments down below if you'd like to add to the conversation, and we can see where this goes, because a lot of this is just subjective, so it's quite interesting. I'm not entirely sure what video to make next time. I'm kind of ambling about, thinking whether or not to make a video on what would Gandalf have been like had he taken the One Ring. How would he have acted as the Ring Lord? Or should I talk about the concept of death and what happens to elves and men and dwarves, for that matter? But let me know. I don't know. I'll think about it. But that will be for next week. So thank you very much for watching. I'm going with Gandalf. Good day. Oh, look, we've got our little wolf of Isengard. Oh, look at that big yawn. He doesn't know what's happening, do you, Harry?